Johnny, as you heard me say, Paterno's back in the news because of what Tom Corbett said to the Philadelphia Inquirer yesterday. When you heard this, what was your first reaction?
I laughed because, as usual, Dino, as you know in this story, and even though you and I don't agree on everything, I think I may have shifted your views partially on Paterno
a little bit
over the last 3-year period. What you hear and what is reality is almost always 180 degrees different. And in this particular case, people need to understand the context of the soon-to-be ex-governor of Pennsylvania saying this and why it's so significant. Tom Corbett was the person who fired Joe Paterno.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, this is basically like saying, this is basically like Lee Harvey Oswald saying, I probably shouldn't have killed Kennedy. It was probably a bad idea. And that's not an exaggeration, because you have to remember, here's what happened. In the midst of the biggest media firestorm in the history of media firestorms, 4 or 5 days after a grand jury presentment comes out, the Penn State Board of Trustees, a 32-member board of clueless cowards who have no idea of what's really happening except what they're seeing on ESPN on the national news. They have a conference call, and the governor of the state, who is a member of the Board of Trustees of Penn State University, because it's a state college, tells these people, you know what, my office has determined that all these horrible things happened under Joe Paterno's watch. Remember the child in the shower, or remember the 10-year-old boy in the shower. That's a direct quote that Corbett told the members of the Board of Trustees on this conference call. They put up to a vote. It actually wasn't even a vote. They put up a motion to fire Joe Paterno, and nobody says anything. Because who's going to speak up in the middle of a media firestorm, and the governor has just told you, trust me on this, Paterno needs to go. Remember a boy that we're being told was raped in the shower, which didn't actually happen, but that's what the governor's telling you. So all 32 sit on their hands and cowardly allow this abomination to occur, and this is what causes the avalanche. Everything is a domino effect from that moment, and Tom Corbett is to blame, and for him to now say that 2 days after losing election, partially because of his actions here, that it shouldn't have happened is hilarious. But it's also significant, and it's a further vindication for my side of the story. Dino, I have nailed this story from day one. That this whole thing is a scam. It's a myth. The media blew it here.
What is the motivation behind Corbett outgoing, as we both mentioned? What is the motivation at this time to say that he doesn't think that they should? And you say he's responsible. He's the one who fired Paterno. It was him. He pulled the trigger. What's the motivation now with him leaving office to say what he's saying about Paterno now?
That's a great question, and I don't understand it, because it actually would have helped him if he had said this before the election. Because you got to remember, Joe Paterno was not only an icon in Pennsylvania, he was a conservative icon. Most of his fans are Republicans. So the reason why Corbett got crushed, now there are a lot of reasons why Corbett got crushed, but one of them is that there were several thousand Republican, stronghold voters who, because of his treatment of Paterno, not only didn't vote for him, they held their nose and they voted for a Democratic Socialist just to spite him over Paterno. Well, it could have theoretically helped him if he had done this before the election. It wouldn't have saved him, but it could have helped him. Afterwards, you know what, Dino? It might just be because he thinks it's the truth. That he might realize now that he blew it. And here's the first sign that I know he knew he blew it. And this is one of those many things that happened that only I noticed, unfortunately, because the media decided they already knew this story. The day after he fires Paterno, this is really important, guys, so listen up carefully. The day after he fires Paterno, Tom Corbett holds a press conference in which he acknowledges and brags that he tells the Penn State Board of Trustees before they voted, remember the 10-year-old boy in the shower, or something to that effect. There's this discrepancy over what exactly he said, but something to that effect. It's on tape. It's at a press conference. Everybody in the news has seen it. It happened. There's no dispute over it. 2.5 months later, he does an interview with a reporter, and he denies ever making that statement, which is just ridiculous. It's on tape. Why would he do that? Well, I immediately realized The only reason Corbett does that is because he has learned something about the 10-year-old boy in the shower. He has learned not to hitch his wagon in his story and his entire indictment of Paterno on that, because he has learned that the story of the 10-year-old boy in the shower is bullcrap, and it never happened. That's the only explanation for why a sitting governor, would deny having said something he said on television. That's the only way this makes any sense. And so, Dino, I think what happened here is someone finally decided to tell the truth. And that's as remarkable a thing as has happened in this entire bizarre case.
Especially from a politician. Again, it just goes to show what an idiot he is, no doubt about it, in regard to thinking that it was going to help him after the election to come clean as opposed to before the election. Again, he probably would have lost anyways. But here's what I don't understand. You said twice so far in this conversation, or in your statements, that this did not happen in the showers. Elaborate on that and explain to us why you're so sure of that what happened to the 10-year-old boy really didn't happen.
Yeah, and Johnny, before you answer that, and I've talked with John about this many times before. Before you answer that, John, we've got about a minute and a half before the break. We're going to keep you over on the break, so I may have to interrupt you here. Okay, so
here's the 1 minute answer to that. First of all, there's no evidence that it did occur other than Mike McQueary's statement 10 years after it happened. Nothing McQueary said, or more importantly did at the time, indicates or is even remotely consistent with there being an assault in the shower that night. But here's the real key. We have a statement. I have a statement. It's on our website, framingpaterno.com, from the kid himself who was in the shower. He makes it clear nothing ever happened, and his actions are completely 100% inconsistent with anything sexual ever happening with Jerry Sandusky, and that's just the tip of the proof iceberg on this incredibly key element of this case.
All right, a lot more to get to with John Ziegler, and we're talking about the Paterno situation, and Tom Corbett's comments to the Philadelphia Inquirer yesterday compelled me to reach back out to John. He's got a terrific website if you want to check it out, framingpaterno.com. We'll talk more about this issue and also get into some of the feelings and thoughts that John has in regard to Jerry Sandusky and how he came to a knowledge, in his opinion, that Jerry Sandusky is innocent of what he was charged for and eventually convicted of. The Sports Radio Mafia with Dino and Pat continues on a Friday right after this. John, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask, first of all, if you would you consent to taking phone calls?
Sure.
All right, you want to talk to John about any of his theories and his feelings on this whole thing? 844-438-3466, 844-438-3466. I can't use the word shocked because I know how John thinks and operates, and he doesn't buy into conventional wisdom a lot, and I have the same kind of a mentality oftentimes, but I was surprised when John, through further research, and he's got a website, by the way, framingpaterno.com. Are you going to come up with a website, framingsandusky.com? I think you should, because I was on my way to saying, Johnny, that I was very surprised, not shocked, but surprised that you came to the thought at some time in the past that Jerry Sandusky is innocent of what he's been charged with and now has been convicted of and is in jail. And Dottie, his wife, who you know very well, and you spoke with her, and she just the other day penned an editorial in one of the papers in Pennsylvania expressing her feelings that her husband is innocent. And
by the way, that was my idea.
Oh, well, let's mention that then. So, but yeah, I was talking with my partner here, Pasquale, and he's adamantly opposed to any thinking that you might have.
I understand
that Sandusky is innocent.
Well, let me give you, look, and I appreciate the opportunity just to give my side of this, since I've researched it for 3 years, devoted my life to it, and destroyed my career over it. I was shocked too, Dino. I presumed when I went into a maximum security prison in Pennsylvania about a year and a half ago and interviewed Jerry Sandusky for 3.5 hours that he was guilty as hell. My defense of Joe Paterno was based, I just accepted, as conventional wisdom told me I had to, that Jerry Sandusky was guilty of most, if not all, of the things that he was accused of and was this horrible monster. When I got out of that prison, Dino, and I think you know me well enough to know, I got a pretty good BS detector. I'm as cynical as hell. I believe everybody's guilty. I believe everyone's a liar. I'm a conservative politically. I believe in the prosecution in most situations. I am not a bleeding heart in any way, shape, or form. I abhor abuse of anybody, specifically children. So I'm not a good demographic for Jerry Sandusky's story to resonate with. As soon as I got out of that prison, my head almost exploded because I was like, this doesn't make any sense at all. It doesn't make any sense.
What doesn't make any sense?
And none of it made any sense at all. And so it forced me, and the timeline's important here, Dino, because when I went on the Today Show after that interview with Matt Lauer, and I did my interview with Matt Lauer, I still essentially said that Jerry was guilty, although I had reservations, and his trial was a sham. His trial was a sham, regardless of what you think of his guilt. I mean, it was over less than 7 months after his arrest. The Penn State administrators still haven't faced trial yet 3 years later. I mean, it's just a joke. But here's the thing. I then because of my suspicions, I totally changed not my view, but the focus of my investigation. Because now I thought, all right, I need to redo the math. See, here's the basic analogy I use on this entire case. Back in November of 2011, we were all told that the Office of the Attorney General in Pennsylvania had come up with a very complex math equation, and they had told us all what the answer was, and the media immediately applauded that answer, and Penn State caved because of that answer, and so that answer, that mathematical equation, was accepted as 100% fact. Well, guess what? I checked the math, and the math is not just a little bit wrong. It's totally wrong. Every bit of the mathematical equation we were told to believe in was wrong. And every single member of the media that I have come in contact with, none of them, Dino, bothered to check the math. They don't even understand the math. They can't explain the math. And the people I've spoken to more people close to this case than Louis Freeh ever dreamed of. I got to tell you, I know that your co-partner probably thinks I'm nuts. Most of your listeners think I'm nuts. A lot of people think I'm nuts. The funny part of this is, Dino, among people who are close to the story, none of them think I'm nuts. They all agree with me. It's just no one.
Like who?
No one has the guts. I'm not going to give you names because I'll get people in trouble. But I'll give you a good name.
Yeah,
Jay Paterno. Jay Paterno, the son of Joe Paterno, believes that Jerry Sandusky is not guilty. And if you listen very, very carefully, if you parse his words in a Clinton-esque way, everything he says, including in his brand new book, he never says that he believes Jerry Sandusky is guilty because he doesn't believe it. But he knows that if he says anything that's remotely against the conventional wisdom on that, his potential media career, because he has no coaching career anymore, his potential media career is destroyed. His family's attempt to try to exonerate Joe Paterno will be destroyed. So the Paterno family has completely embraced what Jay knows to be a false narrative. Jay knew Jerry his whole life. He coached with Jerry. He knows. In fact, he told me before I even knew. I thought Jay was crazy when he first told me this. He told me he did not believe that Jerry Sandusky ever had sex with a boy. Way back in September of 2012, after Jerry had been convicted, after the Free Report, and I thought, he's just nuts. Well, then I realized his theory of what really happened here makes a hell of a lot more sense than anybody else's, and it's completely consistent with everything that I have learned in hundreds of hours of phone conversations and interpersonal connections with Dottie Sandusky, dozens of letters and 2 interviews in prison with Jerry Sandusky, hours of conversations with the adopted children, researching every single one of these accusers. The whole case, it's not reasonable doubt. I wouldn't give a damn about reasonable doubt, Dino, because that would be unfortunate. It would be bad for our judicial system. But if a monster's still in prison, you know what? I'm not going to lose any sleep over it. I'm not going to cry over it. I'm not going to risk my career over it. I wouldn't be doing this if I didn't not only suspect. I'm positive. This is how crazy this case is. I'm positive he never had sex with a boy.
Are you as positive as to say you would stake your own child's life on the fact that Jerry Sandusky never sexually assaulted any of those children?
Here, if the question was, all right, and I have a beautiful 2-year-old daughter, and there was and God forbid there was a gun to her head, and the question was, tell me the right answer to this question, or your daughter dies.
Right.
Did Jerry ever have sex with a boy? in a heartbeat.
Hold on a second. Hold on. You say sex versus molestation. There's a difference.
I mean, did he ever commit a clear sex?
Did he ever molest a boy?
Right. Did he ever molest a boy? Did he ever do something sexually with a boy that was clearly wrong, inappropriate, criminal, whatever? I mean, there are lines of ambiguity here. I mean, with regard to affection and
No, John. Affection. I'm not talking about affection. I'm talking about intent. I'm talking about deviant behavior.
Right.
You would say the answer with your daughter's life on the line. You would say no. He never had anything to do with deviant behavior around boys ever.
I wouldn't even hesitate.
So this is one of the greatest miscarriages of justice in the American judicial system, in your opinion.
I believe that this is the inverse in every possible way of the O.J. Simpson case. Everything that happened in O.J., reverse it, including, by the way, because I know a lot of people will be thinking, well, what about the jury? All right? Well, think about what the jury happened in O.J. The jury in O.J. was mostly black. They were afraid of coming back into their community with a verdict of guilty, right? Because they would be considered Uncle Toms, they would be against their race, they would be betraying themselves. Whatever explanation it was clearly a racial verdict. Well, you flip that in the Sandusky case. You have 12 members of the state college community, all the community of which is being accused of having placed football ahead of finding and condemning and convicting or arresting a child molester. The entire community, there's if you looked what happened during that verdict, there are thousands of people cheering, like the Romans and the Christians being sent to the lions. Outside of that courthouse when Jerry is convicted, it's horrendous to even look at in retrospect. The reality is that jury knew what their job was. They were told by Penn State and by the media, especially when Penn State fired Joe Paterno, for God's sake, that Jerry is clearly guilty. They have no choice but to believe that Jerry is guilty. The victims were sanctified. All their stories were accepted as coming on a tablet from Moses, when not one of their stories makes any sense at all. And I fully understand. You're not going to have a perfect witness. There are no perfect witnesses in a case like this. This is a tough kind of case to try. I get that. I have allowed for that. But I've looked into every single one of these stories extensively. They're all bull crap. But the media and the environment and the fear of State College being portrayed as a pedophile protector gave that jury no choice. They were simply rubber stamping what everybody else already thought they knew, because they had done the math incorrectly and nobody checked the math. Nobody was in a position to check the math except for me, because I'm the only guy who ended up going into prison and speaking to him for 3.5 hours on audio against the rules of the Pennsylvania State prison system. How about that? I mean, because I knew no one would believe me if I didn't record it. So here I snuck in a recorder into a maximum security prison so that there would be a record of this, which people can see at framingpaterno.com. And I am positive on so many levels that this whole case is just a myth. It's a myth. The whole thing is a myth.
Hey, John, do you think there was any issue of his guilt or again, the media bias, whatever you want to call it? How much credibility was lost in Sandusky's case based on his attorney, Joe Amendola? Because that guy just looked like a complete flake through the entire process. And I don't know whether or not it was a situation where he is actually like that in real life. I'm sure you've interfaced with him. But I just thought that it was almost circus-like for him to have an attorney like Amendola. It almost hurt the credibility. I mean, you sound like you could defend Sandusky better than Joe Amendola could have.
Well, I think that's probably true, but I've been very defensive of Joe Amendola, because I know Joe very well, and I know this situation very well. And what I believe happened with Joe is a couple things. First of all, Jerry didn't hire a Johnny Cochran because he didn't think he needed a Johnny Cochran. You got to remember, think about this logically, right? If you are guilty as hell, right, don't you go out of your way to hire the biggest, like OJ did. Again, this is the inverse of OJ.
John, I'm not buying that.
Well, okay, I'm just telling you the truth.
No, I'm not buying
buy
it.
or
I
not.
mean, no, this is your theory. You're saying if you're as guilty as hell, listen, this guy he knew what he was facing. My goodness, and he
don't know
knew.
Jerry. You don't know how
Wait a second.
naive.
Well, okay.
You don't know how naive Jerry is.
We both agreed during the last time we were on the air together that the part of the reason that people, myself included, don't buy your theory that Sandusky never laid a hand on any of these kids is because of his comportment, his speech patterns, the way that
you don't know him.
The way he handles himself. But wait a minute. You're telling me this guy's facing life in prison and he's just going to go get some public defender?
Well, if you let me finish the story here, he knew Joe. He trusted Joe. He told Joe Amendola, this is how naive Jerry is. He told Joe Amendola a week before the trial. He said, can't I just get a chance to talk to these kids and figure out what the heck's going on here? And can't we all just resolve this? And Joe was like, are you kidding, Jerry?
Really?
I mean, Jerry is the most naive person on the planet. On the planet. Jerry still thinks he's getting out. He could only think that if two things were possible. There had to be two explanations, only two explanations for that possibility. Either he's insane, which he's not, or he's innocent. Because only an innocent man, under the circumstances he's facing, could believe he's going to get out of prison someday. But let me go back to Joe Amendola. So Amendola, who is, I think, a good guy, an honest guy, and actually did a much better job in this case than people realize. I've posted at framingpaterno.com the closing statements of Amendola and the closing statements of the prosecution. And I guarantee you, if you go to a foreign country where no one's ever heard of this case and you ask people to read those two closing statements, Amendola crushed the prosecution. But here's the thing where I can relate to Joe better than anybody else can. This story is so insane. The media coverage of it is so horrendous, so biased. The public reaction to it is so toxic. You go crazy in the middle of it. I have felt it 1/100th of what Joe did, but when I went on the Today Show, I actually texted Joe afterwards. I said, Joe, holy crap! I totally now understand what you were dealing with. This is insane. All the normal rules are completely obliterated. Up is down, down is up, right is left, left is right. Nothing makes any sense. I think Joe Amendola went loopy. I told him this. I think he went temporarily insane. And I don't blame him, because he was dealing with an insane situation where nothing made sense, and none of the normal rules apply.
As you listen to John here, I don't know how you feel about Paterno, but in terms of Sandusky, are you buying that he didn't molest any of these kids?
Well, at least he's opening my eyes to it before we got on.
He hasn't given us a lot of examples, but based upon what he said so far.
I'm going by his reputation of him being a no-nonsense guy. And why would John lie to us? There's no reason for him to cover up.
No, I'm not saying John's lying to us. I'm asking you, do you believe, gun to your head right now, you've got to be right with this answer. Did Jerry Sandusky lay any hands on those kids?
I can't answer it only because of what he said.
You changed your mind in the last 20 minutes. It took him 20 minutes to change your mind.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, only because he sat in the cell. He agrees that Amendola is a little bit of a nut job or turned into one, which made Sandusky look bad. The only thing I can't get my hands around, John, is how do the jurors all get the wool pulled over their eyes?
Because here's what happens. All right, you got to remember, these are people who have been told for months Jerry is guilty.
Johnny, hold your thought on that. We're going into a break. Come back on the other side. It is the Sports Radio Mafia with Dino and Pat. John Ziegler, my good friend, political pundit, sports pundit, documentary filmmaker, talk show host. Used to be a good friend of Sarah Palin, among others. And a guy who's got his opinions, which is whether I agree or disagree, is why I've always been fond of John. So we'll be back on the other side. Any thoughts, comments, observations you may have, phone lines are open, 844-438-3466. 844-438-3466. This is the Sports Radio Mafia with Dino and Pat on sportsradiomafia.com and our flagship home in St. Augustine, Florida, USA. It's 96.5 FM. Back with John Ziegler, Paterno, Sandusky, maybe some of your calls right after this. And John Ziegler is back with us. And John, continuing with your answer to Pasquale's last question to you, I believe it was, how could the jury all get it so wrong altogether? And you were on your way to saying...
Here's what I'm saying. This case was all about testimony. All about believability. Your credibility was everything. There's no physical evidence, no hard evidence, not a tape recording, no DNA, no evidence, no pornography, which is highly unusual for a case like this, no evidence of any sort of a payoff. So there's only testimony, no hard evidence, no physical evidence. So therefore, in a case where there's only testimony and credibility is everything, people's perceptions are the whole case. Are you tending to believe someone or tending not to believe them? How in the world could 12 people in State College, Pennsylvania, possibly have had a remotely open mind as to who was believable and who was not, based upon the 7 months from the time Joe Paterno gets fired and Penn State declares Jerry Sandusky guilty for the whole world and the media applauds and brings out their pom-poms, the 7 months between that moment and the end of the trial, which is an unbelievably fast trial. It's ridiculous. It's record speed. It's an abomination from a due process standpoint. No, I would submit to you that Jerry Sandusky lost any semblance of a presumption of innocence. The victims were presumed to all be telling the truth. And the reality is they all got paid millions of dollars, Dino. And one of the many things people don't remember, don't know, probably never knew to begin with, you guys probably aren't aware of this. I'm not going to quiz you because it'll probably embarrass you. You'd be shocked to know that on the day Jerry Sandusky got arrested, there were only 2 human beings claiming that Jerry Sandusky had engaged in sex acts with them. 2! Both of whom have massive problems with their stories. Only 2. Once Joe Paterno is fired, there are newspaper reports the next day. Penn State will be on the hook. I was looking at it just a moment ago. Penn State will be on the hook for $100 million, Business Insider reported, on the next day. What is that? That tells every trial lawyer in the state of Pennsylvania, Fort Knox is wide open. Welcome. Come on in. Make yourself at home. Write your own check. No questions asked. And by the way, I have done an extensive investigation into the Penn State settlement issue. You're going to find out eventually that was the biggest sham in the history of the world. All you had to do was just make a claim and you got money. I'm going to prove that. The reality is that anything that happens after November 9th, 2011 is irrelevant because those people had plenty of time to come forward. Previously, they never did, and they never did until they knew money was on the table.
And speaking of that, and I acknowledged this to you during the last conversation we had on air several weeks ago. The smoking gun, the red herring, the inconsistency that is his adopted son, Jerry Sandusky's adopted son, Matt Sandusky, I believe is his name, defended his father to the hilt initially, sat in the courtroom next to his mother, Dottie Sandusky, as a sign of support and solidarity during the trial, went on record as saying that the man never touched me. Testified. And then when the money started, when the faucet opened up and the money started, being, spewed out of the faucet, all of a sudden, John, this kid changes his tune, has an epiphany one day and says, oh yeah, that's right. I forgot. I must have suppressed all these feelings. And my dad did molest me, did come downstairs, did do this, did do that. I mean, that right there, to me, is the strongest argument that you have for the case you're trying to make that Sandusky is innocent.
Well, you're exactly right, because Matt Sandusky is the rest of this case on steroids. Let me just quickly give you what Matt Sandusky's version of this truth is. He testified under oath in the grand jury in this case that nothing ever happened. He didn't believe any of the accusers. As you said, he attended the first day of the trial with Dottie. He then, in the middle of the trial, tells the police, by the way, after leaving his children with Dottie Sandusky to babysit them so he can go to the police and become a victim in this case, he tells them that Jerry blew kisses on his stomach and may have grazed his penis. Rather benign abuse, and he tells a story that even at that time didn't make any sense.
Oh, John, let's not forget to add also that he went against his wife and fought for his kids to be able to see their grandpa.
You can see that documentation, the legal documentation of that at framingpaterno.com. After Jerry's arrest, he took his kids to see Jerry. He had to fight his ex-wife in court for the right for them to see Jerry after his arrest. So then he tells the police this very benign abuse. Then he does an interview with Oprah Winfrey, in which suddenly his now claim is he had remembered in the middle of the trial horrific abuse, because I guess a grazing of the penis wasn't good enough for Oprah. So now he's talking about oral sex and anal manipulation and all sorts of things that came out of the blue. But now, next week, a movie is coming out called Happy Valley, which stars Matt Sandusky, where his story, which is totally different than the Oprah story, because he did the interview for Happy Valley well before he did the Oprah interview. And now he's saying it wasn't just that he suddenly remembered in the middle of trial. He talks in great length about how he came forward because he didn't want to continue to be a liar and a coward. Well, if you're being a liar and a coward, you know that you're not telling the truth. That means you know you were abused, which means you didn't suddenly remember in the middle of the trial. It's a joke. I've got a 30-minute video at framingpaterno.com right now in which people can see for themselves all sorts of documentation, legal documentation. Matt Sandusky's story is a flat-out joke, and the fact that the media has totally bought into him.
That's when that's the thing. I was going to say I don't understand it. I do understand it. I mean, how could the media not say that you've done a complete, 180 on this, Mr. Matt Sandusky, after defending your father, after fighting to have your own children see their grandfather, after sitting in the courtroom, after pledging your support, all of a sudden now, as I said before, the spigot gets turned on, the money comes out, all of a sudden you flip-flop. Now, I suddenly remember that my father did this, that, and the other thing. Speaking of the movie you just mentioned, I'm glad you brought it up because I saw something about this earlier this week, John. Happy Valley, this new documentary. Thumbs up, thumbs down?
Well, I have an extensive report on it. I've actually seen it. I've released clips from it, which I'm sure didn't make the producers very happy. In fact, I have the entire movie, which I'll probably be releasing next week before it comes out, which will really make them pissed off. I interviewed to direct the film. The film is a joke. It's an absolute joke. I told the producers it was a joke. It stars Matt Sandusky, and more importantly than Matt Sandusky, it stars Matt Sandusky's attorney. And this is why Matt Sandusky is so important. Matt Sandusky's attorney, Andrew Shubin, represented 9 accusers in this case, including the Mike McQueary quote-unquote victim. Andrew Shubin is a lying sack of crap who was victim searching and ambulance chasing on this case from day one. He is a victim creator. He made millions of dollars in this case, and when you watch this movie, you know he is a complete liar. He has no credibility. And to me, he's the key to this whole case because it was Andrew Shubin who immediately saw the opportunity here for money, and he was the one who flipped the McQueary victim from a supporter of Jerry into a victim. He did the same thing with Matt Sandusky. Those two cases are connected, and when people understand the real story of Matt Sandusky, they see how the rest of this whole case happened. Matt was not an aberration, and for the media to buy in, and you just made a very important point. Think about this, folks. If it was that easy for Matt Sandusky to pull this off when he's clearly lying, isn't that an indication of what the environment was like for all the rest of the accusers? Doesn't that make you think, well, wait a minute, if it was so easy for him, then wasn't it even easier for those who we don't even know their names? Come on, use your brains, people. This is not that difficult a case. I'm not alleging a conspiracy. It's not even a close call when you understand the full context of everything. In fact, there's the prosecution version of this story makes no sense at all. Jerry had no ability to keep these kids quiet. He was a nobody. He was a middle-class nobody who only had a few Penn State tickets and a couple of Nike shoes. Lance Armstrong was able to keep his cover-up going for years because he was super rich, super famous, and super powerful. Jerry had none of that. It doesn't make any damn sense. Kids are not going to keep putting up with sex acts at the age of 13, 14, and 15 when they're not gay simply for a couple of Penn State football tickets.
John, let's go to the phones out of Pennsylvania, USA. Here's Brad on the Sports Radio Mafia with Dino and Pat and John Ziegler. Hi, Brad.
Hi, fellas. Just appreciate giving John the time on the radio station and getting this word out. And I'm behind John. I've been watching him and listening to him since the very beginning. And I'll tell you, I live here in Pennsylvania, and I agree with him 100% on how it went down. He's got it right.
Did you, Brad? Did John convert you on either of the two primary people involved in this case? Paterno number 1, and then Sandusky number 2. At any point in the past, did you feel that Paterno was complicit with all this? And did you believe at one point that Sandusky was guilty of what he was charged?
I went into this with an open mind and just seeing what happens. You have to go here in Bellefonte in the whole area. It was a shutdown, and like you said, 7 months, just don't make sense. It's really a shame, and what can happen to when you get the big media out, and what you got to really feel sorry for is the people that are innocent, and they're not given a day in court, rightfully. But if I question to John,
yeah.
The only thing I got, and I've been watching this like a hawk, everything that's been said and done since this whole trial with him and Ray Lehar, they kind of separated, and I guess it kind of bothers me in a way. I kind of wish they could have stayed together or whatever, but that'd be my question for them. But I watched them both. I think they're great, and I think they're right on the target.
Well,
thank you guys for having John on.
Thanks, Brad. Appreciate it.
Well, it's an inside baseball question, but I'll answer it in a way that hopefully people can appreciate. I had I guess for lack of a better term, someone I associate with on our website, framingpaterno.com, who's an investigator here. He and I parted ways a while back over the issue of Sandusky's guilt. Privately, he had told me he was 95% sure that Jerry Sandusky never had any sexual acts with a boy. However, he was afraid to say that publicly. And you know how I am, Dino. I abhor cowardice and lying more than anything in the world. And I cannot deal with a coward and a liar. And so I jettisoned him, and I'm glad that I did, because I have no time for such things. I actually have more disdain for people who know that Jerry and Joe are innocent and won't say it publicly than I do for the morons who don't understand the obvious realities of this case.
Do you believe, John, and you say Sandusky eventually expects to be released, get out, whatever, did the ship sail? Has it sailed forever? If someone looks over the facts of this case who is, a legal expert, and you're not a legal expert, you're a terrific researcher, but someone who is a learned legal mind, someone who has established precedents before and tried cases and got people justice and so on and so forth. Is the judicial system set up for someone to make application to go back in and to get a retrial for Sandusky? Is that a realistic scenario that could unfold in the years ahead, or maybe in time for Sandusky to get before another jury in another courtroom at some time?
There is what is called a post-conviction relief process in Pennsylvania. Jerry has a new lawyer. He's very reputable. And by the way, I've heard from other lawyers who I've had no connection to. People have just read my website who told me they think I'm dead on. So it's not as if, because I'm not a lawyer, although I have an amazing record in defending myself in court, undefeated as a matter of fact, the reality is that I think there is a legal chance, but I have been trying to at least take some toxicity out of the air so that anyone who looks at it might at least look at it with an open mind, because I think politically that's the biggest problem that Jerry has. It is political suicide for anyone to even imply that he is innocent, and I think that's what he doesn't understand. I think he still thinks this is a legal battle. He doesn't fully understand that public relations is a big part of it. That's why I had Dottie Sandusky write the op-ed piece that came out this week. That's why I went on the Today Show with her, because basically she's his best weapon, because she knows he's innocent. And she was a witness. She was a person at the scene of the alleged crimes. She has to be lying or delusional for him to be guilty, and she's not. So the reality is, Dino, in the real world, I don't think it's going to happen. I don't. I don't have confidence in the process. I don't have confidence in Jerry's lawyer. And I don't have confidence in society. But you know what? My hope is I'm going to live long enough so that eventually before when the money runs out, the money is going to run out on these accusers. And eventually their consciences are going to get to them. And there's a couple of kids in particular, you and I have talked about them previously, who I believe will eventually break and will eventually tell the truth of this matter. It's not going to happen today, tomorrow, this week, next year even, but it's going to happen eventually. And it's one of my deepest hopes that I'll be alive to see it. I'll be vindicated eventually on this case 100%. I'm 1,000% sure I'm right. I just don't know whether or not anyone's ever going to realize it or if I'll live long enough to see it, but that's my hope.
It's almost like coming out and saying you saw an alien. everybody's going to say, yeah, I got on the spaceship, I flew all around. And again, your credibility either, dies on the vine there, or you've got some other proof. And
well, I've been right about
you're out
everything. I've been right about every prediction I've made in this case. No one has proved me wrong about anything I've said. And by the way, I understand your analogy about the alien, but here's the funny part of that. I actually believe I'm the one that's saying there is no alien. I'm the one saying there is no Loch Ness Monster. I'm the only one using my frickin' brain. Because everyone else decided they saw a Loch Ness Monster, but there is no Loch Ness Monster. He doesn't exist. It's a complete, this whole story is preposterous on its face, and yet everyone bought in. And for a number of reasons we don't have time to get into right now, but I'm the one saying there ain't no monster. There ain't no alien. So just please keep that in mind.
Good point.
John, I applaud you as always for your research and your work and your dogged determination to fight for and present your side of things. And listen, you've moved me a little bit. You have, I got to admit. And I want you to keep going. Obviously, I know you're not going to slow down, so we'll continue to follow this. I'm sure that other shoes are going to fall, and when they do, in this case anyway, you'll be the first one I call. So,
Dino, thanks so much for the open mind and the time. I appreciate it.